We all have a side of ourselves we don't post on Instagram, the thoughts we hide, the emotions we bury, the mistakes we hope no one remembers. And here's the truth. Your shadow isn't your enemy. It's your unclaimed power. When we ignore it, it controls us. When we face it, it frees us. Think of your life like a house. The living room is what you show guests, clean, lit, perfect. But the basement, that's where you throw everything you don't want seen. Old boxes, broken furniture, dusty memories. Shadow work is walking down into that basement with a flashlight, and instead of judging the mess, you start asking, why did I put this here? What was I afraid of? The shadow shows up in everyday life. When someone cuts you off in traffic and you explode in rage, that's not just about traffic. It's about control, respect, and the part of you that hates feeling powerless. Or when you feel jealous of someone's success, that jealousy is pointing to a dream you've abandoned. Your shadow is saying, remember me? I wanted that too. Here's the twist. We think ignoring these feelings makes us strong. It doesn't. It just buries them alive. And buried emotions don't die. They leak. They show up in our tone, in our choices, in the way we treat people and ourselves. Facing your shadow isn't about self-punishment. It's about self-reunion. A friend once told me, I finally realized a part of me I hated was just a younger version of me who didn't know better. That hit me, because when you see your shadow as a wounded child instead of a villain, compassion replaces shame. Here's how shadow work starts. Notice your triggers. If it makes you overreact, there's a story underneath. Write it down. Your journal is the mirror your shadow can't lie to. Ask, when did I first feel this? Often, you'll trace it back years before you thought. Respond with curiosity, not judgment, because shame locks the basement door, but curiosity opens it. You'll know shadow work is working when the things that used to own you no longer control you. The insult that would have ruined your day now makes you smile. The success of others feels like inspiration, not threat. You stop being a prisoner of your hidden self and start being the master of your whole self. Self-mastery isn't about being perfect. It's about being whole. And wholeness means loving the light in you and making peace with the dark. So the next time your shadow appears, don't turn away. Shake its hand. Thank it for the lessons. And let it walk beside you instead of behind you, because you can't be truly free until you own every part of your story. Key points of my speech related to this. Your shadow is not your enemy. It's your hidden power and unhealed self. Ignoring the shadow causes it to control your reactions and choices unconsciously. Triggers and strong emotional reactions point to unresolved parts of your shadow. Shadow work starts with noticing, writing, tracing, and approaching with curiosity. Compassion toward your shadow leads to self-reunion, not self-punishment. Self-mastery comes from wholeness, accepting both light and dark within you. Most people live their whole lives thinking their shadow is the bad part of them, the thing they have to hide, suppress, or outrun. They think of it as the enemy. But the truth is, the shadow is like a wild animal that's been locked in a cage in the back of your mind for years. It's pacing, restless, misunderstood, but not inherently dangerous. The danger only comes from leaving it trapped and starving. I remember once talking to a man who said, I've spent 20 years trying to kill the part of me that feels jealous, insecure, and angry. And I asked him, what if that part isn't here to destroy you? What if it's here to protect something you lost a long time ago? He paused, and you could see something shift behind his eyes. That's the moment you start to realize the shadow isn't the villain of your story. It's the keeper of your missing treasures. Imagine you're walking down a quiet street at night, and you see a shadow following you. Your heart races. You try to walk faster, but it keeps pace. You turn corners, take shortcuts, but there it is, always there. You feel hunted. That's how most people feel about their inner darkness. They treat it like a stalker. But what if you turn around, really looked at it, and realize it's just you? That's the shift. The shadow is you, not the smiling, polished you, but the raw, unfiltered version. The one who still remembers the first time you felt rejected, the first time you swallowed your truth to keep the peace, the first time you learned it wasn't safe to be fully yourself. Those moments didn't vanish. They sank underground into the shadow. And here's where the magic comes in. Every time you push a part of yourself into the shadow, you're not just burying pain. You're also burying power. The kid who was told to stop being too loud didn't just hide their voice. They hid their ability to command a room. The teenager who was mocked for being too sensitive didn't just bury their tears. They buried their ability to feel deeply and connect with others. The woman who was told her ambition made her selfish didn't just dim her fire. She buried the very drive that could have built her dream life. The shadow isn't a trash bin for your flaws. It's a vault for your brilliance, sealed shut because someone, somewhere, convinced you it was dangerous to show it. I once met a woman in her 50s who had spent her entire adult life as the quiet one. She avoided conflict, never asked for raises, always put others first. When we spoke, she said she felt invisible. I asked her about her childhood, and she told me a story about being 12 years old, standing up to her father about something unfair, and being punished for talking back. She remembered the sting of being slapped and the shame of being told she was too much. That day, she decided to stay small. She didn't just hide her voice, she hid her courage. For decades, her shadow carried that courage like a secret seed. And the moment she decided to meet her shadow, to remember that 12-year-old and listen to her instead of silencing her, everything changed. She asked for a promotion. She set boundaries. She spoke her mind. And she realized that the thing she feared most, her too much energy, was actually the thing that made her magnetic. The shadow is like a friend who's been knocking at your door for years, but every time you hear the knock, you pretend you're not home. It's persistent because it holds the keys to rooms in your inner house you've forgotten even existed. Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." That's the tragedy of ignoring the shadow. You keep tripping over patterns you don't understand, attracting the same kind of heartbreak, sabotage, or limitation, and you think, this is just how life is. But it's not fate. It's the shadow trying to get your attention. Picture a stage with two spotlights. In one, you're standing, smiling, saying all the right things, being exactly who you think the world wants you to be. In the other, your shadow stands, crossed arms, impatient, holding all the feelings you've disowned. The longer you ignore that second figure, the louder they start to whisper. They'll whisper through jealousy, through sudden anger, through that strange sadness you can't explain. And the moment you finally walk into that second spotlight and say, "Okay, I'm listening," the whispers turn into truths you didn't know you were ready to hear. Sometimes the shadow's voice is soft and tired. "You never let me rest." Sometimes it's fierce. "I'm sick of being silent." And sometimes it's heartbreakingly tender. "I just want you to love me too." When you see it that way, the enemy becomes the ally. The monster becomes the guardian. And instead of running, you start to walk beside it. You realize it's not here to shame you. It's here to return you to yourself. This is why the shadow holds hidden power. Every fear hides a strength. Every shame hides a truth. Every wound hides a gift. Think of an old oak tree. On the surface, it's strong and rooted, but underground, there's a whole unseen network of roots. That's your shadow. It's the underground system feeding the tree. You can ignore it and pretend it's not there, but if you really want to grow taller, stronger, more alive, you have to tend to what's beneath the surface. The real breakthrough happens when you stop labeling parts of yourself as bad and start asking, what is this here to teach me? That anxiety you hate might be the part of you that's begging you to slow down and take care of yourself. That envy you feel might be a signpost pointing toward the life you secretly want, but are too afraid to pursue. That anger might be the energy you need to finally set boundaries. The shadow speaks in emotions we've been trained to avoid, but those emotions are maps. They lead you back to the places you abandoned yourself. And when you pick yourself up from those places, you don't just reclaim lost power. You gain wisdom that no one can take away. I've seen people go from feeling powerless to unstoppable simply by befriending their shadow. Not because the shadow disappeared, but because they stopped letting it operate in the dark. It's like finally inviting that wild animal out of the cage, feeding it, understanding it, and realizing it's been guarding your treasures all along. The claws you were afraid of turn out to be the very tools you need to climb out of the pit you've been stuck in. The growl you thought was a threat becomes a roar that announces your return to yourself. And maybe that's the most liberating truth of all, that the very parts of you you've been told to fear are the ones that will set you free. Ignoring the shadow doesn't make it disappear. It makes it stronger. It hides in plain sight, weaving itself into your words, your choices, your relationships, without you even realizing it. You think you're in control, but in reality, you're being steered by forces you've never taken the time to face. It's like trying to drive a car while a stranger has their hands on the wheel. You're sitting there believing you're making all the turns, but the path you're on feels eerily familiar, full of the same mistakes and disappointments you've lived through before. That's the shadow's quiet work, shaping your life in the background while you believe it's just bad luck or how things are. I knew a man who was endlessly frustrated in his relationships. He'd say, "Every woman I date ends up leaving me. They say I'm too cold, too distant." When I asked him about his childhood, he told me his father left when he was 6, and his mother, overwhelmed, became emotionally unavailable. He learned early that vulnerability was a risk, that showing his feelings could lead to abandonment. So, without even realizing it, he built a wall. That wall became part of his shadow. As an adult, whenever someone got too close, his shadow would take over, pulling him back, keeping him safe from the pain he once knew. But what he saw as his natural personality, being reserved, guarded, wasn't really a conscious choice. It was an unconscious defense. Until he saw that, nothing changed. He kept repeating the same heartbreak over and over, thinking it was just fate. You might think your anger is just about the rude comment someone made today, but often that fire has been burning for years, waiting for a spark. Maybe you were overlooked as a child, ignored when you spoke, dismissed when you tried to stand up for yourself. So now, when someone cuts you off in a meeting, your shadow reacts as if it's fighting for survival, not just for a turn to speak. And because you haven't made that link, you judge yourself. I overreacted. Instead of realizing your shadow was trying to finish a conversation that started decades ago. It's not just emotions, either. The shadow shapes the stories you tell yourself about who you are and what's possible for you. Think about the person who always self-sabotages right before success. They work hard, get close to a breakthrough, and then something happens. They procrastinate, pick a fight, quit altogether. On the surface, it looks like bad habits. But underneath, the shadow might be holding a belief planted long ago. If I shine too brightly, people will resent me. Maybe they learned it when a sibling got jealous after they achieved something, or when a parent dismissed their wins as not a big deal. That belief becomes the invisible script, and the shadow makes sure they never rise so high that they risk that old wound again. Jung once said, "What you resist persists." The shadow is persistent because its goal isn't to punish you, it's to protect you. It remembers every bruise to your ego, every sting of rejection, every moment you felt powerless. But because it works in the dark, it protects you in ways that also limit you. Like a guard dog that barks at every stranger. Even the ones who come to help, the shadow doesn't distinguish between real danger and opportunity. It just reacts. And so you find yourself turning down invitations, hesitating to speak up, shrinking back from risks, all the while telling yourself it's just your preference or personality, when in fact it's your shadow keeping the old wounds sealed away. I think of a woman I once met who said she hated public speaking. The very idea made her shake. She avoided any job or opportunity that might put her in front of an audience. But when she finally traced the fear back, she remembered being 8 years old, reading aloud in class, stumbling over a word, and hearing the snickers from her classmates. The teacher didn't step in. She felt exposed, humiliated. Her shadow learned something that day. Speaking up leads to shame. So for decades, the shadow worked to protect her, keeping her quiet, safe from that moment ever repeating. But the price was high. She missed out on promotions, avoided leadership roles, silenced ideas that could have changed things. It wasn't until she recognized the shadow's role that she could thank it for protecting her, then step into the light anyway. When the shadow runs the show, life feels smaller than it needs to be. You notice patterns, always dating the same type of person, always ending up in the same conflicts, always feeling a certain insecurity rise in specific situations. You tell yourself it's just coincidence, but deep down, something whispers that you've been here before. That's the shadow's fingerprint. It doesn't care if you're happy. It cares if you're safe according to its old definition of safety. And so long as you haven't made it conscious, it will keep making your choices for you. The hardest part for most people is accepting that the shadow isn't just made of what's wrong with them. It's made of the parts of them they never gave a chance to grow. The girl who was too bossy might have become a powerful leader if that quality hadn't been buried. The boy who was too emotional might have been an incredible artist or healer if those emotions hadn't been shamed. But when those parts are suppressed, they don't die, they hide, and hiding takes energy. That's why ignoring the shadow often leaves people feeling drained, anxious, or restless. You're spending half your life holding a door shut, while the most vibrant parts of you are knocking from the other side. Facing the shadow is uncomfortable because it asks you to admit you've been carrying wounds that still bleed into the present. It asks you to take responsibility for your reactions, to see that not everything just happens to you. And that's confronting, because once you see the shadow, you can't unsee it. You have to choose whether to keep letting it run your life or to start working with it. And working with it means being honest when you're triggered, being patient when old fears rise, and learn to speak to yourself with the kind of compassion you didn't get when those wounds were first made. It's not a quick fix. The shadow doesn't reveal itself in one conversation or one journaling session. It comes out slowly, in patterns you start to notice, in flashes of memory, in those moments you pause mid-reaction and ask, wait, why did that bother me so much? And in that pause, in that awareness, the shadow loses just a little bit of its unconscious grip. Over time, those pauses get longer. You start catching yourself before you send the angry text, before you retreat into silence, before you sabotage the opportunity. You start realizing that you have a choice. And that's the first taste of freedom. Because ignoring the shadow isn't neutral. It's an agreement to live on repeat. But facing it, even slowly, starts to unlock the cycle. It's like discovering you've been reading the same chapter of your life over and over, and for the first time, you see the page number. You realize you can turn it. And when you do, the story doesn't have to end the same way it always has. Triggers are like little earthquakes in the soul. On the surface, they look like small moments, a comment, a glance, a change in tone, but inside, they rattle the foundation of who you think you are. Most people mistake triggers for the problem itself. They say, that person made me angry, or that situation stressed me out. But triggers are never just about the present moment. They're messengers from the past, carrying letters you refuse to open for years. And until you read them, they'll keep showing up in different disguises, delivering the same truth you're trying not to face. I remember sitting with a man who told me he couldn't stand being interrupted. It didn't matter if it happened in a meeting or during casual conversation. His blood pressure would spike instantly. To others, he looked like he had a short fuse. But when we dug into it, he remembered being a boy at the dinner table, trying to tell his father about something he was proud of, only to be cut off and told to be quiet. It wasn't the interruption that hurt. It was the message beneath it. What you have to say isn't important. That's what his shadow remembered. And so, decades later, every interruption wasn't just an inconvenience. It was an echo of that moment. His shadow was still fighting for the little boy who wanted to be heard. This is why noticing your triggers is so powerful. They're emotional fingerprints left by old wounds. They show you exactly where your shadow is hiding. But most people run from them. They distract themselves. They lash out. They blame others. They miss the opportunity to pause and ask, why did this hit me so hard? If you think about it, two people can face the same situation and have completely different reactions. One person laughs off a sarcastic comment. Another person feels their chest tighten, their stomach knot, and they carry that comment for days. The difference isn't the event. It's the shadow that event touches. There's a woman I know who used to get jealous every time her friends traveled somewhere exciting. She would scroll through their pictures, feeling a mix of resentment and sadness, and then scold herself for being petty. But when she explored that reaction, she realized it wasn't about the vacations at all. As a child, her family struggled financially, and she often overheard her parents arguing about money. She learned early on that adventure and joy were for other people. Her shadow had been carrying the grief of a little girl who wanted to explore the world but felt trapped in scarcity. Every photo of someone on a beach wasn't a reminder of what she didn't have. It was a reminder of what she once believed she could never have. When she understood that, the jealousy became a guide instead of avoiding it. She used it as fuel to start planning her own small trips. That's the thing about triggers. Once you listen to them, they can point you toward what's missing, not just what's wrong. Triggers are also masters of disguise. They don't always show up as explosive emotions. Sometimes they come as withdrawal, numbness, or even overcompensation. A man might feel deeply insecure in social situations but mask it by talking too much, dominating every conversation, so no one has a chance to see his fear. A woman might feel the sting of criticism so sharply that she becomes perfectionist, constantly overachieving to avoid being judged. The behavior looks like confidence or ambition, but underneath, it's a shadow running interference, making sure no one gets close enough to touch the bruise. One of the most profound things I've learned is that triggers often carry the key to your self-mastery. Noticing them is like finding breadcrumbs on the path back to yourself. The shadow doesn't hand over your power easily, but it leaves clues. That tightness in your throat when someone challenges you, that's a clue. The way your mood drops after scrolling through social media, another clue. The irritation that bubbles up when a coworker gets recognition you think you deserve, that's not just about them. It's about you, your story, and the parts of you you've left behind. Of course, the hard part is resisting the urge to judge yourself for being triggered. People say things like, I should be over this by now, or I'm too sensitive. But sensitivity is just awareness without a filter. It's your system telling you there's something unresolved. If a smoke alarm goes off, you don't shame the alarm for being loud. You check for fire. Triggers are the smoke alarms of the psyche. They might be inconvenient, but they're there for a reason. I once worked with someone who couldn't handle being corrected, even in the gentlest way. If a manager suggested a different approach, they would spiral, feeling attacked, undervalued, even humiliated. Eventually, they remembered being a teenager and bringing home a school project they were proud of. Their parent barely looked at it before pointing out everything wrong with it. That day, their shadow decided that mistakes weren't safe. Decades later, even mild feedback set off the same alarm. When they finally saw that connection, they could separate the present from the past. They could say, this is feedback for the work, not a judgment on me as a person. That separation is where the power lies. The beauty of working with triggers is that once you recognize the root, the reaction starts to lose its grip. You might still feel the first spark of irritation or hurt, but instead of letting it spiral, you pause. You breathe. You ask, what is this reminding me of? That moment of curiosity is like turning on a light in the room where the shadow hides. It can't control you in the same way when you can see it clearly. And the truth is, triggers can even become your allies. They can teach you where your boundaries are, where your values lie, where your unmet needs are calling for attention. A person who feels anger every time they see someone being mistreated might discover that advocacy and justice are core parts of their purpose. Someone who feels a pang of loneliness in a crowd might uncover a deep need for authentic connection, not just surface-level socializing. It's not about eliminating triggers. That's impossible. Life will always have moments that stir old feelings. It's about transforming your relationship with them. Instead of being yanked around by invisible strings, you start holding the strings yourself. Instead of reacting blindly, you respond with intention. The same trigger that once pulled you into a spiral can become the spark that moves you toward healing, growth, and deeper self-understanding. When you start noticing your triggers, you're not just learning about your shadow, you're mapping it. And the more detailed your map becomes, the less loss you feel when you stumble into its territory. You stop fearing those inner earthquakes because you know exactly what the fault lines are. You can walk through them with steady steps, knowing that what once felt like an attack is actually an invitation. An invitation to see yourself more clearly, to reclaim the pieces you left behind, and to step into a version of yourself that's not ruled by the past, but guided by the wisdom it left behind. Curiosity changes everything. Most people meet their shadow with judgment, and judgment is like slamming a door in its face. You see an ugly thought, a jealous feeling, a sudden burst of anger, and you immediately label it bad, wrong, weak, shameful. The moment you do, the shadow retreats deeper into the dark, dragging your power with it. But curiosity is different. Curiosity opens the door, steps inside, and says, "Tell me your story." It doesn't mean you approve of the feeling or want to stay in it. It just means you're willing to listen. And listening is the only way the shadow will start to trust you enough to reveal what it's been holding all these years. I remember speaking with a woman who admitted she'd always thought of herself as unfriendly. She said people often told her she seemed cold, distant, even intimidating. For years, she felt ashamed of it. She would force herself to smile more, talk more, try harder to fit in. But the more she tried, the more unnatural it felt. When she finally got curious instead of critical, she asked herself, "Why do I keep people at a distance?" The answer didn't come right away. But over time, memories surfaced, moments in her teens when her openness was used against her, secrets she shared that were turned into gossip, trust she gave that was betrayed. Her shadow had learned a simple rule: closeness equals danger. Her distance wasn't cruelty, it was armor. And the moment she understood that, she stopped hating herself for it. That understanding gave her the power to choose when to lower the armor, rather than wearing it all the time. This is what curiosity does. It transforms what looks like a flaw into a clue. Judgment says, "This is who I am and it's bad." Curiosity says, "This is what I do. Why?" The difference might sound small, but it's the difference between being trapped in the dark and finding the light switch. There's a story I once heard about a man who hated his temper. He saw it as a sign of failure, a weakness. Whenever he got angry, he would feel ashamed afterward, apologizing profusely, vowing never to lose control again. But the pattern kept repeating. Then one day, instead of condemning himself, he paused in the middle of his anger and silently asked, "What are you protecting me from?" That one question changed everything. His anger wasn't random. It was a shield. It rose up when he felt unheard, dismissed, or cornered. It had been doing its best to defend him since childhood, when speaking up wasn't safe. By getting curious, he stopped treating his anger like a monster and started treating it like a messenger. When you judge your shadow, you make it hide. When you approach it with curiosity, you invite it to speak. Think about a scared animal. If you yell at it, it runs. But if you kneel down, keep your voice soft, and extend your hand, it might inch closer. The shadow works the same way. It's not going to hand over its secrets if it thinks you're going to attack it. It needs to know you're there to understand, not condemn. One of the most common traps people fall into is trying to fix the shadow without first understanding it. It's like taking apart a clock without knowing how it works. You might break it completely. A man who thinks, "I need to stop procrastinating," might push himself harder, set more deadlines, beat himself up when he falls short. But if he got curious, he might realize his procrastination isn't laziness at all. It's fear of failure. And that fear might be rooted in an old experience of being ridiculed for making mistakes. The behavior is just a visible tip of an iceberg. Curiosity helps you see everything beneath the surface. I think about a client who told me she hated her own neediness. Whenever her partner didn't respond to a message quickly, she felt panic rise in her chest. She would start sending more messages, calling, needing reassurance. Then afterward, she'd feel embarrassed, telling herself she was too much. But when she shifted into curiosity, she asked herself, "What am I actually feeling in those moments?" She realized it wasn't just about the unanswered text. It was about the little girl inside her who had to work hard for any scrap of attention from her parents. That child had learned that love could disappear without warning. Once she saw this, the behavior made sense. She didn't shame herself for it anymore. She started giving herself the reassurance she craved, instead of demanding it from others in a way that pushed them away. Curiosity is gentle but powerful. It doesn't rush. It doesn't demand an immediate solution. It sits with the discomfort long enough to understand it. And that's hard, because sitting with discomfort feels unnatural. We're wired to want quick relief, to silence the noise in our heads. But every time you rush to push a feeling away, you miss the chance to learn what it's there to teach you. Even physical sensations can be invitations for curiosity. Maybe your stomach knots every time you have to speak up in a group. Judgment says, "You're weak. Get over it." Curiosity says, "Interesting. When did I first feel this?" And if you follow that thread, you might find yourself back in a high school classroom, standing up to read aloud while classmates snickered. That knot in your stomach isn't about the group in front of you now. It's about the shadow that's been carrying that humiliation for years. Curiosity also removes a need for instant change. The moment you stop trying to force the shadow into silence, it relaxes. You can observe it like you'd observe weather, seeing the storm clouds without running inside. You can say, "Oh, there's my envy again. What's it pointing to? What do I want that I've been denying myself?" That's not indulgence, it's investigation. It's treating yourself as a mystery worth exploring instead of a problem to be solved. What's remarkable is that curiosity naturally leads to compassion. You can't truly understand a part of yourself without softening toward it. When you see the little boy behind the defensiveness or the little girl behind perfectionism, you stop trying to destroy those parts. You start asking how to help them feel safe enough to step out of the dark. And when those parts feel safe, they stop hijacking your life. The people who master their shadows aren't the ones who crush them into submission. They're the ones who learn to listen without fear. They treat every emotional reaction as a clue, every old habit as a breadcrumb. They follow those breadcrumbs back to the source. And once they find it, they don't slam the door shut. They leave it open. They invite the shadow to sit at the table, to be part of the conversation. And maybe that's the secret. Your shadow doesn't want to be erased. It wants to be recognized. Curiosity is the language it understands. Judgment makes it hide. Curiosity makes it speak. And once it speaks, you begin to realize that what you thought was your enemy has been waiting all along to become your greatest ally. Compassion toward your shadow is the bridge between knowing yourself and actually healing yourself. Without compassion, shadow work can turn into self-punishment, digging into old wounds only to shame yourself for having them. People think they're doing the work when they uncover a painful memory or recognize a toxic pattern, but they follow that discovery with, "I can't believe I'm still like this," or "What's wrong with me?" They're not healing. They're reinforcing the same wounds. Compassion changes the tone of the conversation you have with yourself. It takes the role of the harsh critic out of your hands and replaces it with the voice you needed most when those wounds were first made. I once knew a man who carried deep resentment toward himself for being too timid in life. He hated how he avoided confrontation, how he let opportunities slip by because he was afraid to take risks. When he started exploring his shadow, he found that his timidity wasn't laziness or weakness. It was survival. He grew up in a volatile home where speaking up often meant punishment, where any show of strength could provoke anger. His younger self learned quickly, stay quiet, stay small, stay safe. But as an adult, he couldn't separate that old survival strategy from his present life. When he looked back with compassion instead of contempt, he saw the truth. His so-called timidity had once kept him alive. That changed everything. Instead of hating himself for it, he thanked that younger version for protecting him. And only then could he gently let go of the old armor. Compassion is about recognizing that the parts of you you've been taught to hate were created with the purest of intentions, to protect you from pain you weren't ready to face. Imagine a child building a fortress out of pillows and blankets because they're scared of the dark. You wouldn't walk in, tear it apart, and scold them for hiding. You'd kneel beside them, ask why they're scared, and maybe sit with them until they feel safe. Your shadow is that child. The defenses might look clumsy or irrational now, but at the time they were built, they were the smartest, bravest choices you had. I remember a woman who struggled with intense jealousy in her marriage. It embarrassed her. She saw herself as mature and confident. Yet one social media post or mention of another woman could set her spiraling. When she finally met her jealousy with compassion instead of denial, she traced it back to being a little girl watching her father give affection to other people but rarely to her. She grew up craving reassurance, craving proof that she was the one someone chose. Her jealousy wasn't immaturity. It was an old wound still looking for closure. Once she saw that, She could hold that younger version of herself in her mind and say, I understand why you feel this way. You're safe now. That kindness toward herself softened the edges of her jealousy in a way years of shaming herself never could. Compassion doesn't mean you justify harmful behavior. It means you understand its origin before you decide how to change it. You can't change something you still believe is a moral flaw rather than a survival pattern. A man who lashes out in arguments might hate himself for it, but if he digs deep, he might find that anger was the only way he learned to be heard in a family that ignored calm requests. If he meets that part of himself with compassion, he can acknowledge its purpose. You're trying to protect my voice, and then teach a new way to serve him without destruction. The hardest part of compassion is that it requires you to drop the whip you've been using on yourself for years. Many people believe that self-criticism is what keeps them improving, that if they let themselves off the hook even a little, they'll stop growing. But shame isn't fuel, it's poison. It keeps you stuck because you're so busy punishing yourself for the wound that you never actually treat it. Compassion is the opposite. It creates the safety your shadow needs to step out of hiding. Without safety, the shadow won't talk. Without talking, it won't heal. I think of a client who told me she hated her procrastination. It made her feel lazy, undisciplined, and guilty. When we looked deeper, she realized that as a child, every task she did was criticized, never praised. Her shadow had learned that if you never finish, you can't be judged. When she saw that, she stopped calling herself lazy and started saying, I understand why you delay. It kept you safe from pain once. But we're safe now. We can try a new way. That shift in tone, from what's wrong with me to I understand why I am this way, was the moment the grip of procrastination began to loosen. Compassion is what allows you to integrate your shadow instead of constantly fighting it. It's the difference between dragging an enemy along the road and walking beside an old friend. When you see your shadow as a wounded child, your instinct isn't to destroy it. It's to hold it, to let it know it doesn't have to fight anymore. And the moment your shadow feels safe, it transforms. The anger becomes passion. The jealousy becomes longing. The fear becomes caution. You don't lose those parts. You evolve them. And here's the thing about compassion. It's not passive. It doesn't mean you excuse harmful patterns or let yourself off the hook indefinitely. It means you guide yourself the way a good mentor would guide you. Firm but kind, honest but gentle. A mentor doesn't scream at you for making a mistake. They help you understand why it happened, so you could do better next time. You become that mentor for yourself. You start replacing the voice of the inner critic with the voice of the inner guardian. There's a quiet power that comes from looking at your shadow and saying, I see you. I know why you did what you did, and I'm not abandoning you. Most people try to exile the shadow, thinking that cutting it off will make them pure, whole, or good. But the parts of yourself you exile don't disappear. They just find other ways to be seen, often in destructive ways. Compassion invites them back home, where you can care for them and give them a role that serves you instead of sabotages you. When you practice compassion toward your shadow, you start to notice subtle changes. The criticism in your mind softens. The moments you used to spiral in shame become moments of curiosity and care. You catch yourself saying, that makes sense, instead of, what's wrong with me? And over time, the parts of you that once hijacked your life start to relax. They trust you now. They no longer have to scream for your attention or sabotage your happiness to be noticed. Maybe the truest form of self-mastery isn't control. It's trust. Trusting yourself to handle whatever comes, because you're no longer at war with yourself. And that trust is built brick by brick through compassion. Not the quick, surface-level kind, but the deep, unwavering kind that says, no matter what I find in the dark, I will not turn away. There comes a point in shadow work when you realize that holding on to the old version of yourself is like gripping the railing of a sinking ship. You think it's keeping you afloat, but it's actually pulling you under. Letting go isn't just about releasing people or memories. It's about releasing identities, beliefs, and stories that have defined you for years. And the most frightening part? You don't always know who you'll be without them. That's why so many people resist this step. They would rather live in familiar pain than face the unknown freedom that comes after release. But you can't become the person you're meant to be if you're still carrying the weight of who you used to be. I remember a man who had spent his whole life being the funny one. It was his armor, his way of keeping people close, but never too close. If he made you laugh, you wouldn't ask him how he was really doing. He wore that identity so tightly that when his therapist asked him to spend 1 week without using humor as a shield, he panicked. "Who am I if I'm not the funny guy?" he asked. It wasn't just a question. It was a cry from his shadow. He had built his identity around a defense mechanism, and letting it go felt like losing himself. But in time, he discovered that the humor wasn't his only gift. Beneath it was a deep, empathetic soul who could connect without performance. That part of him had been buried for years, waiting for space to breathe. Letting go is rarely a clean, dramatic moment. It's more like slowly loosening your grip on something you've held for so long your fingers have grown stiff. For one woman I work with, that something was a belief that she had to be perfect to be loved. She didn't even realize she carried it until she noticed how exhausted she was from constantly performing, at work, in friendships, even in her marriage. Shadow work brought her face to face with the little girl, who learned that mistakes led to punishment or withdrawal of affection. She held on to perfectionism as if it was her life jacket. When she finally began to let go, it was terrifying. She stumbled, she second-guessed, she felt exposed. But each time she allowed herself to show a flaw and was still met with kindness, a brick in her old wall came down. That's how letting go works. It's not an event. It's a process of trust built moment by moment. Sometimes what we need to release isn't even ours to begin with. Generational shadows passed down silently. Beliefs, fears, and wounds inherited like old family furniture. I met a man who carried a deep fear of financial instability despite having a steady, well-paying job. His shadow work revealed that this fear came from his grandfather, who had lived through extreme poverty. The anxiety wasn't his own lived experience, but he had internalized it through the stories, the warnings, the constant reminders to save every penny. Letting go for him meant honoring his grandfather's struggle, while acknowledging that he was no longer in that reality. He didn't betray his family by releasing the fear. He liberated himself from a burden that was never fully his to carry. The truth is, letting go often feels like loss before it feels like freedom. There's grief in releasing an old identity, even if that identity caused you pain. It's like moving out of a house you've outgrown. You know it's too small, maybe even unsafe, but every corner holds a memory. Part of you doesn't want to leave because the walls feel familiar. Your shadow clings to that familiarity because it equates it with safety. But safety isn't the same as growth. And there comes a moment when you have to choose between staying in a house you've already memorized or stepping into a space you've never seen, trusting there will be room for you to expand. One of the hardest shadows to release is resentment. People think resentment is just anger at someone else, but often it's anger at yourself for allowing something to happen, for not knowing better at the time. I knew a woman who had been betrayed by a close friend. Years later, she still replayed the betrayal in her mind, telling herself she was foolish, naive. Her shadow fed on that resentment because it made her feel guarded and powerful. No one could hurt her again if she stayed angry. But in truth, it kept her chained to the moment of betrayal. Letting go for her meant forgiving, not the friend, but herself. She had to see that she made the best choice she could with the awareness she had then. When she finally released that self-directed anger, she felt lighter, as though a part of her that had been frozen in time was finally able to move forward. Letting go doesn't mean erasing the past. It means removing its grip on your present. Your shadow will try to convince you that if you let go, you'll lose control, that you need the anger to stay safe, the identity to stay loved, the fear to stay alert. But control is an illusion. The truth is, you gain more real control over your life when you release the false sense of control your old patterns gave you. When you put down the baggage, you can finally run instead of drag your feet. I've seen people hold on to old wounds like treasured possessions because they believe those wounds are proof of who they are. If I let this go, one man told me, then what do I have left? What's my story? That's the paradox. Your story isn't what happened to you. It's what you choose to create from here. But as long as your hands are full of the past, you can't grasp the future. The shadow understands this, which is why it resists. It fears that without the wound, You'll have no anchor. What it doesn't realize is that anchors can keep you steady, but they can also keep you stuck. Sometimes letting go is dramatic. Burning letters, quitting a job, ending a toxic relationship. Other times it's quiet. Choosing not to respond to a message, catching yourself before you slip into an old reaction, leaving words unsaid because you know they no longer serve you. These moments might seem small, but they're the threads that, over time, unravel the grip of the shadow. Each choice to release rather than cling is a declaration. I trust the unknown more than I trust my old pain. And here's the secret. When you finally do let go, you don't lose yourself. You meet yourself. You meet the version of you that was always there beneath the armor, the fears, the inherited beliefs. That's what makes letting go both the hardest and the most liberating step in shadow work. It's not about becoming someone new. It's about finally having space to be who you've been all along. And the moment you feel that space open, you realize it was never the ship that was keeping you safe. It was you. You are not your past. You are not your mistakes. You are not the labels you've been given or the masks you've been forced to wear. You are the space beneath all of that, the raw, unfiltered truth that has been waiting patiently for you to see it. But here's the thing, that truth will not wait forever. Every day you hold on to what no longer serves you is another day you trade your freedom for familiarity. Every moment you cling to an old wound is another moment you postpone your healing. Every time you choose the comfort of the known over the courage of the unknown, you tell your shadow it gets to run your life. Let it go. Let it go. Let it go. Not because it's easy. Not because it doesn't hurt. But because you deserve to know who you are without the weight. You deserve to wake up without carrying yesterday into today. You deserve to meet the version of yourself that isn't defined by fear, resentment, or someone else's story. The clock is ticking. Not in the sense that you're running out of time, but in the sense that every second you wait is another second you could be living free. The choice is yours, and it's always been yours. So when you walk out of here, when you turn off this video, when the noise of life starts again, remember this. The most powerful thing you can ever release is the person you no longer need to be. Your shadow isn't here to break you. It's here to make you whole, and the moment you face it, you become unstoppable. If this resonated with you, please share, and subscribe, because together we can spread this message and change the world. Share, subscribe. Let's grow this journey together.